What would you do if the country you fought for forgot your name? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The courtroom was cold. Not because of the air conditioning or the sterile tile floors, but because of the silence. It was the kind of silence that made your stomach twist, like something big was about to happen, but no one knew what. The kind of silence that only comes before someone either gets justice, or gets crushed by the weight of the system. Jack Callahan stood with his hands cupped in front of him, his shoulders slumped, his hair matted, and his beard tangled like an overgrown bramble. His coat, if you could still call it that, hung off his body in pieces. One sleeve was duct-taped at the shoulder. His boots didn't match. He didn't look like a man. He looked like a ghost of one. People in the courtroom barely looked at him. The bailiff avoided eye contact. The prosecutor reviewed notes like this was just another routine case, a petty charge of public disorder and resisting arrest. Just another transient who lost his cool. Nothing more. But sitting up there at the bench was someone who couldn't look away. Judge Michael Daniels leaned forward as the case file lay open before him. He wasn't reading it. Not anymore. His eyes were fixed on Jack. Something in him had shifted. Daniels was a man in his 50s with a disciplined build and silver hair combed tight. A black robe hung off his shoulders like a cape of authority. But that day, it looked heavier than usual. The bailiff called out, State vs. Jack Callahan, case number 22-9143, charges, disturbance of the peace, resisting lawful arrest. Mr. Callahan, Daniels said, his voice flat but with a hint of something under the surface. Do you have representation? Jack looked up for the first time. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with fatigue. But deeper than that, they held something else, something ancient and broken. Shame, maybe. Or maybe nothing at all. No, sir, he said hoarsely. Can't afford one. Daniels nodded slowly. You understand the charges against you? Yes, sir. I didn't mean to hurt nobody. It wasn't like that. We'll get to that. There was a pause, too long of one. Daniels looked down again at the file. Then at Jack. Something was wrong. He closed the file slowly, interlacing his fingers on the bench. Do you remember Fallujah? He asked, suddenly and softly. Jack flinched. The prosecutor blinked. Your Honor. Daniels stood. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. But he stood with purpose. With weight. He reached for the clasp at the front of his robe. Wait, what's happening? The bailiff asked, stepping forward slightly. Daniels pulled the robe off his shoulders and folded it, placing it gently over the bench. Underneath, he wore a plain blue button-down shirt and khaki slacks. Gasps swept through the courtroom. I know this man, Daniels said. Not as a defendant. As a soldier. A brother. Jack stared up at him, confused. Sir. Daniels took a breath that shook slightly. You saved my life. 15 years ago. You dragged me out of a burning Humvee after an IED blast outside Ramadi. You got hit in the leg. You nearly died, and I never saw you again. Silence. Real silence now. The kind that doesn't invite any more words. Jack looked like he might collapse. His lips trembled, and his knees buckled slightly. He shook his head. No. That can't be. You were Specialist Callahan. 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines. That was you. Daniels stepped around the bench and walked toward him, not as a judge, not as someone in authority, but as a man who remembered. I spent years wondering what happened to you, Daniels said. I thought you made it out. I thought you got help. Jack's eyes flooded. I didn't. I didn't know who to turn to. After Tommy died, after everything. I couldn't keep it together. I know, Daniels said gently. I do. Reporters hadn't been in the room initially. No one had expected this to be a case worth covering. But a young law intern in the back had pulled out her phone and hit record. And within hours, that footage would hit over 1 million views. Not because of the viral spectacle. But because, for once, a courtroom wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about remembrance. Daniels turned to the rest of the court. I'm not stepping down from this bench. I'm stepping forward. For someone who stepped up for all of us and was left behind. He placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. Jack crumbled, not from shame, but from release. A lifetime of holding it together with cheap coffee, bad nights, and broken pride gave way under the weight of a single human touch that said, "You still matter." Long before the courtrooms, before the boots and blood and medals that gathered dust, there was Indiana. Not the postcard version with rolling cornfields and cozy diners, but the forgotten edges, where broken trailers lined gravel roads and kids learned to fight before they learned to read. That's where Jack Callahan came from. He was born in 1984 in a town so small you couldn't find it on most maps. No hospital, just a one-room clinic where his mother gave birth to him during a blizzard, screaming through contractions while a volunteer EMT held her hand. She named him after her favorite book character, Jack London. Said he'd be tough. Said he'd be brave. She wasn't wrong. Jack's mother, Susan, was a waitress at the diner off Route 11. She worked double shifts just to keep the heat on. She made toast for Jack in the mornings even when there wasn't enough for her, and read him stories by candlelight when the power got cut. She had the kind of strength you don't notice until it's gone. Jack was 8 when she died. Lung cancer. She'd never smoked a day in her life. After that, it was just Jack and his dad, Ray. And Ray was a problem. A mechanic by trade and a drinker by choice. By the time Jack turned 9, he knew how to replace a carburetor and how to duck when a bottle flew across the kitchen. Ray wasn't evil. He was just broken in places no one ever fixed. Jack survived by escaping. Books. Forest's long walks with his dog, Max. And one friend, Tommy Geller. They met in 2nd grade, bonding over a shared hatred of math homework and a love of war movies. Tommy had a nervous laugh and big dreams. He wanted to be a firefighter. Jack didn't know what he wanted to be. Just knew he didn't want to be this. One night, when Jack was 15, Ray came home drunker than usual. Said things Jack would never forget. Jack ran away that night. Slept behind the church for 2 days before Tommy's mom found him and took him in. That was the moment Jack started counting the days until freedom. When you're 18 and angry, the military feels like salvation. Recruiters came to the high school with their perfect smiles and shiny uniforms. Jack didn't need convincing. He didn't even ask what the job was. He signed the paper, packed his bag, and didn't look back once. Boot camp was the first time anyone ever called him, sir. He liked that. He liked the structure. The clarity. The rules. The feeling of being part of something bigger than himself. For the first time, he had direction. Purpose. Pride. He sent letters to Tommy, funny ones. Told him he'd join him in the fire department when his time was up. They made plans. The kind of plans you believe in when you're 20 and dumb and invincible. And then came the deployment. Fallujah. 2004. Jack was part of 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, the tip of the spear in Operation Phantom Fury. House-to-house fighting. Booby traps. Days without sleep. Nights where the only thing you could hear was your heart thudding in your helmet and someone whispering a prayer. It was there he met Lieutenant Michael Daniels. Daniels was tough, but fair. One of those officers who didn't bark orders unless he was willing to do them himself. Jack respected that. Daniels once carried a wounded Marine across 2 blocks of sniper fire. Jack watched it happen and thought, maybe there are still good men left. The day of the IED blast is burned into Jack's mind. The convoy was coming back from a recon sweep when the lead Humvee hit a roadside bomb. Daniels' vehicle flipped. Fire. Screams. Jack didn't think, he just ran. He dragged Daniels out seconds before the ammunition inside cooked off. He got a medal. But medals don't hold you at night. They don't bring back the friends you lost. They didn't bring back Tommy either. Tommy died in a house fire back in Indiana, trying to save a kid who wasn't even inside. Jack read about it in a letter 3 months later, sent from the chaplain. He didn't speak for 2 days. When he finally did, he asked for a transfer. He needed distance, from the pain, from the war, from himself. But pain doesn't care about geography. When Jack came home, everything was different. The streets were the same, but quieter. The people looked through him, not at him. The jobs he applied to didn't call back. The nightmares didn't stop. And alcohol was easy to find. So was silence. Eventually, silence turned to shouting. And shouting turned to eviction. He lost his apartment, then his car, then whatever was left of his pride. He became what people fear becoming, invisible. Until one cold morning, when he tried to buy a sandwich with a crumpled, expired voucher, and got arrested after a shouting match turned physical. And now, here he was. Back in Indiana, in a courtroom, as a defendant. Not as a hero. Not as a man. Just a name on a docket. But that morning, when Judge Daniels stood up and took off his robe, something cracked open in him. A memory. A face. A fire. A Humvee. And something else, too. Hope. Camp Pendleton, 2002. Jack stood on the parade ground, sweat pouring down his neck as the California sun baked the asphalt beneath his boots. Drill instructors barked commands, but Jack didn't flinch. Not because he wasn't tired. Not because he wasn't scared. But because he belonged here. For the first time in his life, every piece of him fit into something. He was Private Jack Callahan now. In the barracks, there were stories traded over rations and pull-up bars. Some guys missed home. Some ran from it. Jack never talked much. He just listened. But when someone messed with the kid from Georgia in week 2, Jack was the one who stepped in. Broke up the fight. Took a punch to the ribs and never swung back. That was the first time people started looking at him like a leader. That was also the day he met Staff Sergeant Marcus "Mac" Duval, a grizzled Marine with a scar across his cheek and a voice like gravel. Mac didn't talk much either, but he saw something in Jack. Pulled him aside one night after drills and said, "You're quiet, Callahan. That ain't bad. But make sure your silence don't get mistaken for absence. Speak when it matters." Jack remembered that. Mac became more than a mentor. He became the father Jack never had. Tough, blunt, but never cruel. He taught Jack how to read terrain, how to clear a room, how to know when to pull back. Not just in combat, but in life. And in one of those rare off-base moments, over coffee and the hum of fluorescent lights in a Waffle House, he taught him about something else, too: love. It was in that same Waffle House, on a rainy Tuesday, that Jack met Samantha Hodge. She was working the counter, hair in a messy bun, eyes sharp as broken glass. She was taking nursing classes at night and working full-time to pay for them. Jack didn't say much the first time. Just ordered black coffee and left a tip twice the size of his meal. He came back 2 days later. Then again the week after that. Eventually, she sat across from him on her break, sipping tea and asking why he always looked like he was holding something back. Jack told her the truth. He told her about Tommy. About Ray. About Susan. About wanting to serve. Wanting to matter. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She just said, "Good. Then make it count." By the time Jack got deployed, Samantha was writing him letters. Long ones. She included newspaper clippings, jokes, photos of her cat. He kept every one of them folded in a waterproof pouch in the side of his rucksack. Sometimes, when gunfire cracked in the distance and everything felt like it might disappear in a second, he'd pull one out. Not to read. Just to hold. Fallujah was hell. 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, thundering 3rd. They were the tip of the spear in one of the deadliest urban combat operations since Vietnam. Room-to-room fighting. Booby traps. Bodies. Noise so constant you stopped hearing it. Jack kept his head down and did his job. He kicked doors. He cleared rooftops. He pulled wounded friends to safety. One of those friends was Lieutenant Michael Daniels. The day of the IED blast is something Jack never liked to talk about. But here's what happened. They were moving down Route Henry when the lead Humvee exploded. The fireball lit the street. Daniels' vehicle took the worst of it, flipped sideways into a wall. Smoke, screaming, chaos. Jack saw it. He was 2 trucks back. While everyone hit the dirt, Jack ran forward. Flames licking the windows. Diesel pouring from the fuel tank. Screams from inside. He climbed through the wreckage, half blinded by smoke, and pulled Daniels out, one arm under the lieutenant's shoulders, the other dragging his rifle. Seconds later, the vehicle erupted. Jack lost hearing in his left ear for 3 days. He didn't even realize he'd been hit in the leg until they got back to base. Daniels survived. Barely. Jack never spoke to him again after that day. Transfer orders came in. Jack moved to a different sector. Life moved on. Sort of. His body returned from Iraq. But his heart. His heart stayed buried under rubble and smoke and friends he couldn't save. He and Samantha got married 6 months after his discharge. A small courthouse wedding. No tux. No guests. Just a simple vow, a shared look, and a deep breath that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something normal. For a while, it worked. Jack worked security at a shipping yard. Samantha started working as a trauma nurse. They lived in a small apartment above a bakery. Jack tried to adjust. He smiled at the right times. Said all the right things. But at night, when the city went quiet, the war came back. Not in gunfire, but in memory. The panic attack started small. Tight chest. Sweaty palms. But then came the flashbacks. Samantha found him once, hiding under the kitchen table with a knife in his hand, shaking. She begged him to go to the VA. He refused. Other guys have it worse, he said. But Samantha knew better. And slowly, the distance between them grew. Not because she didn't love him, but because Jack wouldn't let her in. One night, after an argument that ended in slammed doors and silence, she packed a bag and left. "You have to want to come back," she said at the door. "Not just from war, but from this." And now, all of that felt like another life. Standing in a courtroom with his wrists cuffed and a judge staring down at him, Jack didn't feel like the man who had once saved lives. Or the man who had once been loved deeply. He felt like ash. Until Daniels stood up. Until memory came roaring back. Until, just maybe, the war inside Jack began to meet the war outside, and something had to give. The flight home from Iraq was silent. Not because the plane was empty, it was packed with Marines, gear, and exhaustion, but because no one knew what to say. No cheers. No victory chants. Just the dull hum of the engines and the occasional cough, like men trying to swallow their ghosts. Jack sat by the window, staring out into endless clouds. He held Samantha's latest letter folded in his jacket pocket, worn at the creases from rereading it so many times. She had written, "I can't wait to make pancakes again, and argue over who gets the remote." It made Jack smile. But something inside him knew it wouldn't be that easy. He stepped off the plane at Camp Pendleton with a limp in his left leg, still healing from shrapnel, and a medical file that said, "PTSD indicators, monitor closely." He didn't want anyone to monitor anything. All he wanted was quiet. For a few weeks, it seemed like he might get it. Samantha met him at the base gate in a navy blue cardigan, her hair longer than he remembered. She wrapped her arms around him and didn't say a word. They stood like that for a long time, letting the world blur behind them. Home, as it turns out, wasn't a place. It was her. They moved into a small one-bedroom apartment above a bakery in San Bernardino. The smell of bread was oddly comforting, even when the nights were loud with traffic and memories. Jack got a job at the port, night security. Not glamorous, but steady. Samantha started doing overnight shifts at the ER. They passed each other like two ships, tired but smiling. For a while, it worked. Until it didn't. It started with small things. Jack flinched at fireworks. He jumped when the toaster popped. He stopped watching action movies, and avoided loud restaurants. Samantha chalked it up to transition, normal stuff, she said. Then came the night terrors. At first, he'd mumble in his sleep. Then shout. Then wake up gasping, soaked in sweat, thinking he was back in that alley in Fallujah, hearing the cries of his wounded team leader, reliving the moment he had to choose between dragging Daniels or saving another Marine who didn't make it. One night, Samantha woke to find Jack sitting on the floor in the corner, knees to his chest, whispering to someone who wasn't there. That was the first time she said the words, "You need help." But Jack didn't want help. He wanted control. He started drinking. Not heavily at first, just a beer after work, then two. But beer turned to whiskey. And whiskey turned to missed shifts, skipped meals, and more silence between him and Samantha. He didn't talk about the war. Not to her. Not to anyone. He didn't even talk about Tommy. Tommy, who'd been his lifeline, his brother, the one person who always knew what to say. Jack never told Samantha that Tommy had died while he was deployed. The letter came from his sister, folded neatly with a small photo of Tommy in a firefighter's uniform. He couldn't process it. So he didn't. He buried it next to everything else. The last real conversation he and Samantha had before she left wasn't even a fight. It was quiet. A Sunday morning. Over coffee. "You haven't looked at me in 3 weeks," she said. "I see you," he replied, staring into his mug. "No, Jack. You don't. You're somewhere else. All the time." "I'm trying." "I know," she said. "But trying doesn't change the fact that I'm living with someone who's not really here." He didn't argue. He couldn't. Because she was right. And the worst part? He didn't know how to be here. After she left, the spiral got faster. He stopped going to work. Started crashing on a friend's couch, then in his truck. Eventually, the truck broke down in the middle of a cold November night, and Jack walked to a bus stop and sat there for hours, just watching traffic pass. No one looked at him. People walked past like he wasn't even there. That's when he understood what it meant to be truly invisible. Not just to society. To yourself. He bounced between shelters. Sometimes slept under bridges, or behind a loading dock behind a gas station. The VA had a backlog. He tried to get help, but appointments took months. And even then, the counselor looked so fresh-faced he might as well have been a college intern. One day, Jack ran into another homeless vet named Eddie, who gave him a half-eaten sandwich and a cigarette. Eddie had been in Afghanistan. They swapped war stories, or fragments of them. Mostly, they just sat in silence. "I used to be somebody," Eddie said one night. "Now I'm a ghost with a driver's license." Jack nodded. "I know the feeling." He didn't mean to get into trouble that day at the corner store. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. Walked in, grabbed a sandwich, and tried to explain to the clerk he'd be back with money. The guy called the cops. Voices rose. Jack panicked when an officer touched his arm. Flashback. Yelling. Flailing. Handcuffs. Booking. And now, here he was. Waiting in a holding cell. Hearing his name called. Looking up and seeing that face. Daniels. The man he saved. The man who stood, took off his robe, and reminded the world that Jack Callahan was still somebody. There's a common myth people tell themselves: he just gave up. But Jack Callahan didn't give up. He didn't suddenly decide to throw his life away. The descent wasn't some dramatic fall from grace, it was 1,000 quiet decisions. One bad break at a time. It started with the layoff. Security cutbacks at the shipping yard. Nothing personal, just numbers. Jack was handed a severance envelope and a handshake by a manager who never learned his name. Samantha told him it was okay, they'd figure it out. But Jack had grown up with fear in his bones, fear of hunger, of eviction, of not being enough. That layoff didn't just take his paycheck. It cracked his sense of control. Then came the night he saw the kid on the bus. It was raining, and Jack had taken a late ride downtown to meet a buddy who'd heard about a part-time gig. Across from him, a kid in a marine hoodie, maybe 19, sat scrolling through his phone. Clean cut. Laughing at a meme. Jack should have felt pride. Instead, he felt rage. How could they look so untouched? So whole. He didn't say a word. Just clenched his jaw and turned toward the window. But that moment lodged itself deep. It told him something he'd been avoiding: the world had moved on without him. Job applications went unanswered. His limp made warehouse work difficult, and the sight of his VA ID card seemed to make HR reps suddenly nervous. He applied for benefits, but the backlog stretched months. His PTSD paperwork was flagged incomplete. They needed more documentation. More evidence. He stared at the rejection letter like it was written in a different language. More evidence. He had the scars. The prescriptions. The nightmares. Wasn't that enough? The final blow came one Thursday in July, 6 weeks before the arrest. Samantha came by the apartment. She had mail for him. A V envelope, unopened. She'd started dating someone new, he could tell. There was distance in her voice. A calm, careful tone, like talking to someone you didn't want to provoke. He asked her to stay. She didn't. Instead, she said something he'd never forget: "Jack, I loved you. I still care about you. But I can't keep rescuing someone who won't even throw themselves a rope." He watched her leave for the last time. Then he opened the envelope. Another denial. No benefits. No compensation. No support. Just bureaucracy dressed up like sympathy. Jack spent that night in his car with the windows rolled down, watching lightning flicker in the distance. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared. And in that moment, something inside him finally stopped fighting. Not out of weakness. Out of exhaustion. A week later, the car got towed. He missed the final payment. No car meant no shelter. He called 3 shelters, 2 were full, the third offered a bed next to a man detoxing from heroin. Jack took it anyway. He stayed there 2 nights. On the third, he left after someone tried to steal his boots while he slept. He wandered to a 24-hour laundromat and sat there until sunrise, staring at the spinning machines like they might spit out a new version of his life. No one asked if he was okay. And if they had, he wouldn't have known what to say. Then came the day at the store. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. Just tap water and a granola bar from a church pantry. He walked into the corner deli, grabbed a sandwich, and went to the counter. His hands were shaking. "I'll pay you back tomorrow," he told the clerk, holding up his expired VA voucher. "Just need something today." The clerk refused. Jack pleaded. Voices rose. A customer called 911. When the police showed up, Jack panicked. One of the officers reached for his arm and just like that, his brain flipped. His heart pounded. His ears rang. His body told him he was in Fallujah again, that this was life or death. He pulled away, shouted, nearly shoved the officer. It lasted 10 seconds. Then they tackled him. Cuffed him. And he was back on the floor, face pressed to cold tile, heart racing, shame seeping in like poison. The jail cell was small. Cold. Gray. The lights never turned fully off. He tried to sleep, but each time he closed his eyes, the past swarmed him: gunshots, fire, screaming, the smell of burnt rubber, the face of a man he couldn't save. He tried to breathe. He couldn't. He pressed his head against the wall and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." To who, he didn't know. Then came the arraignment. He expected nothing. Maybe a public defender, a fine, some probation. But instead, a familiar voice called his name. A voice that didn't belong to a stranger. Daniels. Jack's eyes locked with the judge's. Recognition hit like a shockwave. Daniels stood. Removed his robe. And everything shifted. The courtroom was cold. Not in temperature, Jack barely noticed that. But in presence. In how the walls felt like they'd heard too many names, too many pleas, and stopped caring a long time ago. Justice was supposed to be blind, but here. It often looked tired. Jack sat with his wrists still cuffed in front of him, trying not to shake. The jumpsuit felt foreign, itchy and humiliating. He kept his eyes low, jaw clenched, breath shallow. He wasn't afraid of prison. He was afraid no one would remember who he really was. And then Judge Daniels stood up. It wasn't dramatic. No music. No gasps. Just a man removing his robe and walking down from the bench. He approached the defense table, not quickly, not slowly, but with purpose, and stopped in front of Jack, who still hadn't looked up. "Jack Callahan," he said. That voice. Jack's head turned, eyes wide. It was him. Lieutenant Michael Daniels. The man Jack had pulled from a burning Humvee in Fallujah. Now wearing a tie and a solemn expression, not a single trace of the sand-covered Marine he'd once been. But the eyes, those were the same. Jack blinked. "Sir." Daniels gave a small nod. "We need to talk." The courtroom sat frozen. The bailiff didn't move. The clerk stopped typing. Even the prosecutor paused mid-page turn, pen hovering in the air. The judge had just walked off the bench, for him. Daniels asked the court for a recess. 10 minutes. It was granted. Barely. In a quiet side room usually used for witness prep, Daniels sat across from Jack at a metal table. "You remember me?" Daniels asked, voice steady but soft. Jack nodded, eyes never quite making contact. "Fallujah. Route Henry. You were hit bad. You saved my life." Jack shrugged. "Just doing my job." Daniels leaned forward. "And now the system we swore to defend has no idea who you are. That pisses me off." Jack flinched slightly. "I don't expect a free pass." Daniels shook his head. This isn't about passes. It's about accountability. For everyone. Including the institutions that let this happen to you. Jack said nothing. Because what do you say when the world finally looks you in the eye after years of pretending you weren't there? Back in the courtroom, Daniels didn't return to the bench. He recused himself from the case, stating a personal connection to the defendant. The court assigned another judge, one from the next district over. But the damage was already done. Not to the process. To the silence. Because Daniels had cracked it wide open. The press got wind of what happened. Judge steps down for homeless vet who saved his life. The headline hit local news within hours, then national outlets the next day. But Jack didn't care about headlines. He cared about the phone call he got from the public defender the next morning. We've got people asking to represent you pro bono. Civil rights attorneys. Veterans advocacy groups. Even a nonprofit in D.C. He didn't understand it. Why now? Why did it take a judge to stand up before anyone else even noticed he was drowning? And then, slowly, the details came out. The incomplete VA file that no one followed up on. The benefits that were never properly processed. The missed mental health appointments, caused not by neglect, but by lack of transportation. The job interviews he never got, because his discharge paperwork was misfiled under, other than honorable, due to a clerical error. A cascade of failures. All invisible. All deadly in their own slow way. Daniels called Jack one night after hours. I'm not here as a judge, he said. I'm here because I owe you my life. And I can't let that life mean nothing. Jack hesitated. You don't owe me anything. I disagree. There was a long pause. Then Daniels said something that stuck. We trained you to survive the battlefield. But we never trained you to survive coming home. That's on us. Jack's case wasn't dismissed, but it was redirected. Instead of jail, the court ordered a full psychological evaluation, immediate medical support through a VA liaison, and a supervised veterans recovery program. Something called Valor Court, a special docket for veterans with trauma-related offenses. It wasn't charity. It was justice with context. And for the first time in years, Jack felt like someone had finally drawn a map out of the dark. 1 week into Valor Court, Jack met Miriam, a trauma counselor and former Air Force medic. She had a sharp tongue, thick glasses, and zero tolerance for excuses. She didn't pity him. She didn't let him deflect. She made him talk. Really talk. About Tommy. About Samantha. About the rage. The guilt. The fact that he felt more alive in Fallujah than he ever did in California. She didn't judge. She just listened. And sometimes, that was enough. Valor Court met on Thursdays. The room looked like any other courtroom. Same stiff benches, same echo in the acoustics, same tired-looking bailiffs. But the vibe was different. No one here was pretending that the people who stood before the judge were criminals in the usual sense. These were soldiers. Veterans. Survivors. And every one of them had been broken in some way by the system that sent them to war but didn't always bring them home in one piece. Jack sat in the back the first day, his body still stiff from sleeping on a cot at the transitional housing unit. His court liaison, Angela Ruiz, handed him a folder with thick paperwork, schedules, and a warning. They won't sugarcoat things. You show up. You speak the truth. You do the work. You slip, even once, they'll throw you back in the regular system. Jack nodded. Understood. Angela leaned closer. We're not here to save you. We're here to help you save yourself. Judge Carla Brenner ran Valor Court. A Navy vet with the demeanor of a no-nonsense mom and the tactical mind of a JAG prosecutor, she greeted every veteran by name. No defendant. No case numbers. Just people. Her eyes met Jack's when he was called up. She looked at his file, then looked back at him. Mr. Callahan. Bronze Star. Combat Action Ribbon. 2 deployments. A history of PTSD, homelessness, and a sandwich you couldn't afford. Is that about right? Jack's throat was dry. Yes, ma'am. She closed the folder. Let's work on making that the start of your story, not the end. And just like that, the program began. Valor Court wasn't a free ride. Far from it. Jack had mandatory weekly therapy. Group sessions with other vets. A sobriety contract. Random drug screenings. Community service. And most challenging of all, accountability journals. Each night, he had to write a reflection. No structure. No rules. Just his thoughts. For a man who hadn't even spoken full sentences for months, that journal became a battlefield of its own. The first entry was 3 words, I hate this. The second, still here. Barely. By the end of week 1, Jack had managed to write about Eddie, the vet who shared a sandwich and disappeared one night, never to be seen again. I didn't even say goodbye, Jack wrote. Because I didn't think he'd matter. That makes me sick. Group therapy was led by Miriam, the same counselor from the intake interviews. Trauma, she told them on day 1, is like a wound that didn't get stitched. You can slap gauze on it, you can walk around like it's not there, but eventually it starts to rot. Jack listened more than he spoke. He heard stories of IEDs, of overdoses, of marriages that fell apart. One guy, Troy, had been a medic in Kandahar. Lost his leg. Now he was trying to stay clean after a year on fentanyl. You think your story makes you different, Troy said to the group, but we're all carrying the same weight. Just in different backpacks. Jack nodded. He got that. 3 weeks in, Jack had a setback. He missed a meeting. Not because he didn't care, but because his ride didn't show, and he had no phone. He tried to explain that to Angela when she showed up at the shelter, her arms crossed and eyebrows raised. You miss one more, she said, and Judge Brenner won't be so patient. You understand? He did. He also hated how broken he felt, how powerless. That weekend, something shifted. Jack was doing community service at a local VA hospital, wiping down chairs in the waiting room, when an elderly vet, Korean War, judging by the faded tattoo, stopped him. You Marine? The old man asked. Jack hesitated. Was. The man shook his head. You are. Don't forget that. It hit Jack like a gut punch. For the first time in years, someone hadn't looked at him like a threat. Or a statistic. Or a screw-up. They'd looked at him like a brother. He wrote about that night in his journal. The entry read. I miss belonging. The Corps gave me purpose, even when the mission sucked. I want that again. Even if I have to rebuild it brick by brick. Angela read it and didn't say much. Just underlined the word, belonging, and wrote in the margin, that's the mission now. Week by week, Jack started to rebuild. He helped another vet fill out his VA forms. He volunteered to lead a group discussion when Miriam was out sick. He even sat down with Judge Brenner one Thursday after court and asked if Valor Court needed help coordinating transport for other vets. You offering to lead that? She asked. He nodded. That's leadership, Mr. Callahan, she said. Don't think I didn't notice. Jack still had a long way to go. He hadn't seen Samantha. He still woke up most nights drenched in sweat. The memories didn't vanish. But something had changed. He had a team again. A mission. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a new purpose. Jack sat at the community center library on a quiet Sunday morning, staring at a blank piece of paper. Around him, other veterans shuffled papers or tapped away at outdated laptops donated to the Valor Court program. A coffee pot hissed in the corner. The room smelled faintly of paper, burnt toast, and something medicinal. Miriam had assigned them all a task for the week: write a letter to someone you never got to say what you needed to. Some wrote to family. Some wrote to themselves. Jack wrote to Tommy. He hadn't spoken Tommy's name out loud in over 3 years. Not since that day in Mosul. He remembered everything about that morning: the smell of diesel, the dry heat creeping through his uniform, and Tommy's ridiculous joke about how even the goats out here have better aim than some of our rookies. Tommy had a way of cracking tension in half with one-liners that would have made a priest flinch. But he always smiled with his whole face. He was Jack's lifeline in the desert, a best friend, a shield, a brother. And then, just like that, he was gone. An ambush. 2 seconds of noise. And silence. They never found all the pieces. Just a dog tag, half melted, still smeared with dirt. Jack's hand trembled as he picked up the pen. He wrote. Tommy. I don't know how to say this. Maybe I should have done it years ago, but I couldn't. Every time I tried, it felt like I was pulling a pin out of my own chest. You were the best damn thing in that godforsaken place. I should have said goodbye. I should have written your sister back. I couldn't even look at your funeral notice. I still hear you. I still talk to you, sometimes. Usually when I'm at my lowest. And I wonder what you'd say if you saw me now. I'm trying to come back, man. I don't know if I'll make it, but I'm trying. That's all I've got right now. I miss you. Jack. He folded the paper slowly, his throat tight, and tucked it into the side pocket of his journal. He never mailed it. He didn't need to. That afternoon, Jack brought his journal to Miriam during check-in. He didn't say anything. Just slid it across the table. She opened it, read the letter, and sat back in her chair. I lost someone too, she said after a long pause. His name was Kenny. Iraq, 2004. Jack's eyes widened slightly. Was he? My fiancé, she said. A good man. Funny. Couldn't cook to save his life. They didn't say much more. They didn't have to. Sometimes grief isn't about the words, it's about being understood without needing to explain. That night, Jack walked to the local park where a small memorial sat at the base of a flagpole, a bronze plaque with the names of fallen local soldiers. He traced the edge of it with his fingers. Tommy's name wasn't there. He wasn't from this town. But Jack whispered it anyway. Tommy James Porter. Corporal. U.S. Marine Corps. Smartass. Hero. Missed every damn day. He stood there in silence, hat in his hands. It didn't fix anything. But it helped. Later that week, Jack shared the letter in group. He hadn't planned to. But something in him cracked open after hearing Troy talk about losing his squad leader in an IED blast. I kept thinking, Troy said, if I'd been faster, louder, smarter, he'd still be here. Heads nodded. Guilt was a shared language in that room. When Jack read his letter, the room went still. Even the air seemed to lean in. When he finished, someone clapped him on the back. Another passed him a tissue. No one tried to make it better. They just sat with him in it. And that was enough. By the end of the month, Jack had completed Phase 1 of the Valor program. He'd shown up every week. Passed every test. Stayed clean. Judge Brenner gave him a firm nod when she reviewed his file. This isn't a finish line, Mr. Callahan. But it's the first damn checkpoint you've crossed in a while. Keep moving. Jack nodded, lips tight, voice low. Yes, ma'am. He walked out of that courtroom and stood on the steps in the morning sun, breathing in the air like it might finally be enough. He wasn't healed. But he was here. And that, for now, was something worth holding on to. It was the middle of another long weekend when Jack got the call. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it had been years. His chest tightened before the words even registered. Samantha. Her name caught in his throat, the one he hadn't spoken in over 3 years. Not out of anger, but out of the strange emptiness that had filled him when she left. Jack, her voice was small, tentative. Are you okay? For a second, he didn't know how to answer. How could he be okay? How could anything be okay after everything that had gone wrong? But the old soldier in him clicked back into place. He swallowed hard. I'm getting there, Sam. Slowly. Her breath on the other end was shaky. I saw your name in the papers, about the court case, and then the judge. Jack, I'm fine, he cut her off, too quickly. Everything's fine. She paused. Are you sure? He hesitated again, unsure of what he even meant by fine. Was he? But he didn't want to dive back into old wounds. Not now. I'm working on it. Just, taking it one day at a time. That wasn't entirely true. But it was easier to say. She was quiet for a moment. I was thinking about you, she said softly, her voice breaking the fragile silence between them. I don't know why I never tried to check in after everything. Jack's throat tightened. You don't owe me anything. You don't get it, Jack, she whispered, the emotion slipping out in a way she probably didn't intend. I left. I couldn't deal with what you were going through. But I should have been there. He let out a shaky breath. You couldn't fix me. I didn't want to fix you, Jack. I wanted to be there. And I wasn't. I wasn't there when you needed me most. The words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just the war that had broken them. It was everything that came after. When Jack came home, he expected a hero's welcome, or at least some kind of understanding. Instead, it was the opposite. Everything he had fought for, the sense of purpose, the bonds forged in fire, disappeared the moment he landed back on American soil. And Samantha? She was supposed to be the anchor, the one person who could keep him grounded. But in the end, she left too. Maybe it wasn't her fault. Maybe it was his. Maybe they both had scars too deep to see through. That night, Jack walked to the park again. The one with the memorial. But this time, it wasn't Tommy's name he traced with his fingers. It was Samantha's. The guilt in him burned hotter than it ever had before. For the first time in years, he let himself think about what it would have been like if she hadn't left. What if they'd fought through it together? What if he hadn't pushed her away? Could they have rebuilt their lives? He didn't know the answer. But he knew something had shifted inside of him. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't change what had happened to them, to him, to everyone else who had come and gone. But what he could do was face it, finally. He could stop running from it. The next week, Jack found himself sitting across from Miriam in their usual group session. I talked to Sam, he said without preamble, eyes staring at the floor. The first time in 3 years. I didn't know what to say. Miriam didn't rush him. She waited. She apologized. He swallowed. And I didn't know what to say to that either. Miriam leaned forward, speaking slowly, sometimes the hardest part is forgiving yourself for what happened. You're still carrying that weight, aren't you? Jack didn't need to answer. The answer was there, hanging in the air. He had never forgiven himself for the way everything fell apart. For the way he let her walk away. That night, Jack wrote again. This time, it wasn't a letter to Tommy or to anyone he had lost in the war. This time, it was a letter to himself. Jack. I don't know what you think you're supposed to be by now. You've tried to keep moving forward, and some days, you're barely hanging on. You've told yourself you're fine. You've told the world you don't need anyone. But you know what? You can't keep running from the things that broke you. You can't keep hiding from the parts of yourself you don't like. It's okay to feel this. To feel everything that happened. It doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're human. So stop pretending you're okay when you're not. Take it one day at a time. And when you're ready, start putting the pieces back together. Jack Callahan. The words came harder this time, but they felt real. Not like a soldier in battle. But like a man who had lost everything, then found a way to rise again. Maybe there was something in that. The next day in group, Jack shared his letter to himself. It was the first time he had spoken it aloud. The room was quiet afterward. Miriam just nodded, her eyes kind. You're starting to see yourself for who you really are, she said quietly. That night, Jack found a little peace. Not a lot. But enough to feel like he could keep moving. Just one more step. The sun was just starting to dip behind the distant hills when Jack entered the Veterans Recovery Center for his next phase of therapy. The air was thick with the promise of change, but Jack wasn't sure if it was the kind of change he was ready for. This was the day of his first therapy session with Dr. Reynolds, the clinical psychologist assigned to help him confront the deeper layers of his trauma. Jack had been avoiding it for weeks, but today was the day. Dr. Reynolds greeted him with a firm handshake and a warm smile. His office smelled faintly of lavender and vanilla, strange for a psychologist's office, but comforting nonetheless. Jack, glad to have you here, Dr. Reynolds said, his voice calm but purposeful. He motioned to the leather chair opposite him. Please, take a seat. Jack lowered himself into the chair, feeling the weight of every inch of his body sink into the soft leather. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you feel like you were being watched. Jack crossed his arms over his chest, unsure how to begin. So, Jack, why don't we start by talking about what brought you here today? Dr. Reynolds asked, leaning forward slightly. Jack looked out the window, his gaze tracing the lines of the distant horizon. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He wasn't sure where to start. The war. The memories. The cold empty nights on the streets. But somehow, everything felt tangled, and no one thread seemed like it could hold it all. I don't know where to start, Jack admitted. There's so much, and none of it makes sense. Dr. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully, understanding. We don't have to unravel everything today. But we can start with one thing. Can you tell me about the hardest memory you carry with you? Jack's throat tightened as the familiar images flooded back, the gunfire, the silence after the blast, the look on Tommy's face as he lay motionless on the sand. But it wasn't just Tommy's face. It was everything that had happened afterward. His return home, the disconnection, the feeling of being a ghost in his own life. I don't know if I can pinpoint one memory, Jack said, voice breaking. It's not just the war. It's the aftermath. It's the way everything, everyone, fell apart when I came back. Dr. Reynolds tilted his head, his gaze softening. The hardest part is often coming home to a world that doesn't understand what you've been through. Jack nodded, the words echoing in his chest like a long-forgotten truth. Tell me more about coming home, Jack. What was that like for you? Dr. Reynolds prompted. Jack closed his eyes, allowing the images to resurface. He remembered the hollow feeling of stepping off the plane in California, the sense that everything around him had changed, but he hadn't. The first few weeks after he returned were a blur, he had been so numb, just going through the motions. He hadn't wanted to talk to anyone, not even his family. He didn't know how to explain the weight he carried, or how heavy it felt to wake up in a bed that wasn't a cot in a war zone. He remembered walking through his front door, expecting his mother's warm hug, but instead, there was only awkward silence. They didn't know how to look at him, let alone how to talk to him. It was the same with Sam. She'd been there when he left, but when he came back, she was a stranger. The person he had been before the war no longer existed, and neither did the life he thought he would return to. I couldn't tell anyone what it was really like, Jack said quietly, opening his eyes. I didn't want them to think I was weak. Dr. Reynolds leaned in slightly. Jack, what you're describing isn't weakness. It's the result of trauma. And it's okay to admit that it's hard. You don't have to do it alone. The session continued for over an hour. Jack said more than he expected to, but it wasn't a breakthrough, at least, not yet. He knew it would take time. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like there was a way forward. He wasn't trapped anymore. He wasn't bound by his past. After the session, Dr. Reynolds handed Jack a small journal. I want you to write in this every day. Not just about the bad things, but also the good things. It's important to keep track of your progress. You might be surprised at how much change happens in small steps. Jack took the journal, nodding slowly. Thanks, he said, his voice quieter than usual. I'll try. The next morning, Jack woke up with the journal on his nightstand. He stared at it for a long while, feeling the weight of the blank pages. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to write. But then something shifted. He reached over, opened it to the first page, and began to write. Dear Journal. Yesterday was the first time in a long time that I actually said the things I've been carrying around. I don't know if it will fix anything, but it feels like a start. I'm scared. And I'm tired. But I'm here. And I'm going to keep going. Step by step. He closed the journal and placed it back on his nightstand, feeling a sense of accomplishment. He had finally written something for himself, something that wasn't a letter to someone else, but a promise to himself. Later that day, Jack met with his group at the Veterans Recovery Center. Miriam asked each of them to share one thing they were grateful for that week. Jack took a deep breath before standing. It was his turn. I'm grateful for the chance to try again, he said, his voice steady. For the first time, I feel like I have a path forward. It's not perfect. But it's something. The group nodded, and there were a few murmurs of agreement. They all understood what he meant, even if they didn't say it aloud. That night, as Jack sat on the steps of his apartment, staring up at the stars, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope. For the first time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild. Not everything. But enough to move forward. And that was enough for now. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jack had always been the kind of man who preferred solitude. It was easier to hide from the world when you didn't have to face anyone, when no one could ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. He had learned that long ago, in the months after he came home from war. But now, as he walked through the doors of the Veterans Recovery Center for his weekly group meeting, something inside him felt different. There was a subtle change in the air, a shift that made it harder to avoid the connections he had spent years running from. He wasn't sure if he was ready for it, but he couldn't ignore it. He had started this process. He couldn't back out now. As Jack entered the meeting room, he noticed a new face among the usual group. A young man, probably in his mid-20s, with a thin frame and an unkempt beard that suggested he hadn't been home long enough to shave. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. Jack sat down at his usual spot, but his attention kept drifting back to the new guy. There was something about him, a rawness in the way he carried himself, as if he was holding on to something heavy that he didn't want to let go of. Jack knew that feeling too well. After a few minutes, Miriam, the group leader, began the session. She turned to the new guy. Why don't you introduce yourself, she said kindly, her voice a gentle invitation. The young man hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously around the room. He opened his mouth, but the words seemed stuck. Jack's heart went out to him. He could feel the weight of those first moments, when you didn't know anyone and the words refused to come out. Jack had been there, too. The first time he'd walked into the group, it had taken every ounce of strength to speak. But he had done it. "Hey, man," Jack said, his voice gruff but genuine. "It's okay. We've all been there. Just take your time." The new guy looked at Jack, a flicker of something passing through his eyes. Gratitude? Relief? Maybe a little of both. "Thanks," the young man muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm Ryan. Ryan Hudson. I just got out of the military a few months ago." "Welcome, Ryan," Miriam said with a nod. "You're in a safe space here. Feel free to share as much or as little as you're comfortable with." Ryan nodded but didn't say anything else. Miriam moved on with the session, but Jack couldn't help but notice how tense Ryan seemed. He wasn't making eye contact with anyone. His hands were fidgeting in his lap, and he looked like he was on the verge of jumping out of his seat at any moment. As the session wore on, Jack found himself reflecting on his own journey. He remembered the first time he walked into that room, how the air felt thick with judgment, how the words felt foreign on his tongue. He hadn't known how to trust anyone, let alone open up about what had happened to him. But over time, the group had become his lifeline. Even on the hardest days, knowing he wasn't alone had been the one thing that kept him going. He could see the same need in Ryan's eyes. He was fighting something, trying to hide it, but it was right there for anyone who was paying attention. After the meeting ended, Jack lingered at the back of the room, pretending to tidy up his things but really just waiting for the right moment. Ryan stood up, his face flushed, and started to walk toward the door. Jack stood as well, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor as he approached him. "Hey, Ryan," Jack said, his tone casual but firm. "Mind if I walk with you for a bit?" Ryan looked at him, hesitant, but then he nodded. "Sure, I guess." They walked in silence for a few minutes, the noise of the bustling city fading into the background. Jack wasn't sure what had drawn him to Ryan. Maybe it was that familiar look in his eyes, the one that reminded Jack of the man he used to be before everything fell apart. Or maybe it was just the feeling that this kid needed someone who understood. "I get it, man," Jack said after a while, breaking the silence. "Coming out of the military isn't easy. And it feels like no one really understands what you're going through." Ryan stopped walking, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had just landed on them. "It's just, everything's different now. I thought it would feel like I'd come back to something normal, you know. But I don't even know who I am anymore. Everything's messed up." Jack nodded. He had felt the exact same way. The feeling of being a stranger in your own life. The struggle to find meaning in a world that seemed to have moved on without you. "It's not messed up," Jack said quietly. It's just hard. But it doesn't have to be forever. You don't have to carry it all by yourself." Ryan's eyes flickered with something like hope, or maybe it was just a little bit of disbelief. "You really think it gets better?" Jack hesitated. The road to healing wasn't easy. There were days when it felt like the weight of his past might crush him, and the darkness threatened to swallow him whole. But there were other days like today, where he felt the tiniest spark of something different. Something worth fighting for. "I think it can," Jack said, his voice steady. "But you have to let people in. You have to trust someone enough to let them help you. Even if it's just one step at a time." Ryan didn't answer right away, but Jack could see the wheels turning in his head. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to believe that things could change. They continued walking together, side by side, in silence. The weight Jack had carried for so long felt just a little lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time in a long while, he wasn't alone. And neither was Ryan. The next day, Jack sat down at the kitchen table with his journal. He opened it to the next blank page and began to write. "Dear Journal. Yesterday I did something that I wasn't sure I was ready for. I reached out to someone who's just starting this journey, Ryan. He's fresh out of the military, and I can see the same kind of struggle in his eyes that I've been fighting with. I don't know if I helped him, but I think I might have. He's hurting, but I think maybe he's starting to believe there's a way forward, just like I am. Maybe that's what this is all about. Not just healing for myself, but helping others along the way. Maybe that's how we all get through this, together. Asterisk. He closed the journal, a sense of peace settling over him. For the first time in months, he felt like he had found a purpose that went beyond his own healing. Helping someone else might not fix everything, but it was a start. And for Jack, that was enough. The day Jack had been dreading had finally arrived. It wasn't the trial. It wasn't the sessions with Dr. Reynolds. No, today, Jack had to face the one thing that had weighed on him since he returned home from war, the friends he'd left behind. Or rather, the one friend he'd lost. Tommy. It had been almost a year since he'd last heard Tommy's voice. The memory of their final conversation was still vivid in his mind. The two of them had argued about something trivial, a misunderstanding that had turned into something bigger. Jack had been so focused on his own struggles that he'd pushed Tommy away without realizing what it meant. The night after their argument, Jack had been out on the streets, lost in his own demons. He hadn't called Tommy to make amends. He hadn't even thought about it. And then, the call came. Tommy had been killed in a firefight. It was a pain that never quite went away, the guilt that gnawed at Jack's insides, reminding him of everything he should have said and done. But today, he wasn't facing Tommy. He was facing someone else. Someone who knew both him and Tommy. Miriam had arranged for a special session today, a group therapy session with a few of the veterans who had served with Jack. As he walked through the doors of the room, his eyes immediately landed on Lena, a tall, no-nonsense woman who had served as a medic alongside Jack and Tommy. Her presence was commanding, but her eyes told a different story, a story of someone who had been through the fire and survived, but at great cost. Lena gave him a small nod as he entered. "Jack," she said quietly. "It's been a long time." He didn't know what to say at first. His throat tightened, and the words that had once come so easily felt like they were trapped somewhere deep inside him. "Yeah, it has," Jack finally managed, taking a seat at the table. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Lena interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "We're here to talk, not to blame. Just, to share." And share they did. One by one, the veterans in the group began to speak. Each one shared their struggles, their victories, their scars, both visible and invisible. It was raw, it was real, and it was uncomfortable. But through it all, Jack couldn't stop thinking about Tommy. He couldn't stop thinking about how he had failed his best friend when he needed him most. As the session progressed, Lena turned to Jack. "You and Tommy," she said softly. "You two were thick as thieves, right?" Jack's heart sank. "Yeah, we were." "You blame yourself, don't you?" Lena asked, her voice more gentle now, almost as if she could feel the weight of his guilt. "I didn't call him. After our last fight, I didn't reach out," Jack admitted, his voice cracking. "He was gone before I could make it right. And now I have to live with that." Lena sighed, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. "We all carry guilt, Jack. Some of it's real, some of it's just what we make up in our heads. You didn't pull the trigger that killed Tommy, but you carry the weight of his death because you care. That's not weakness. That's love." Jack looked up, surprised. "Love?" Lena nodded. "Yeah. Love. You don't get to choose the ones who are taken from you, but you get to choose how you remember them. And Tommy wouldn't want you to be carrying this burden forever." The room was silent for a moment, and Jack let the words sink in. He had never thought about it that way. All this time, he had been punishing himself, convinced that he deserved to feel the pain. But maybe he didn't. After the session, Jack lingered behind, watching as the others filed out. He could feel the tears welling up behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall, not yet. Lena was the last to leave. She stood by the door for a moment, as though waiting for Jack to speak. "Do you think I'll ever stop feeling this way?" Jack asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena smiled softly, though it was a bittersweet expression. "I don't know, Jack. But I do know this, you don't have to carry the weight alone anymore. There are people here who care. You've got to let them in." The next few days passed in a haze. Jack spent his mornings at the recovery center, participating in therapy and group sessions, but his mind kept returning to the conversation with Lena. Her words had hit him harder than he had anticipated. Maybe it was time to stop carrying all this weight on his own. But just as he was beginning to come to terms with the idea of healing, something unexpected happened. It was a Thursday morning when Jack received a phone call. The number on the screen wasn't one he recognized, but the voice on the other end made his heart skip a beat. "Jack." A familiar voice said. "It's Sam." Jack froze. It had been years since he had spoken to Sam. The woman who had been his everything before the war, his lover, his partner, his best friend. Their relationship had fallen apart after he returned home. He had been a ghost of the man she had once loved, and she had walked away. He hadn't blamed her, not really. He had given her no choice. "Sam." Jack's voice was hoarse, as if the years of silence had taken their toll. What's going on?" "I heard about what you've been going through," Sam said, her voice soft. "And I just wanted to check in. See how you're doing." Jack swallowed hard. "I'm okay. Well, I'm trying." "I heard about the group sessions," Sam continued, her tone warmer now. "It sounds like you're making progress. I just wanted you to know. I'm proud of you, Jack." For a moment, Jack didn't know how to respond. It was the first time in a long while that anyone had said something like that to him. "Thanks, Sam," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't think I'd ever hear that from you again." Sam paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more vulnerable. "You know, Jack. I never stopped caring about you. I don't know what's going to happen between us, but I think we both deserve a chance at healing." Jack's heart raced. Could it be possible? Could they really start over? He didn't know the answer yet, but for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of hope. That evening, Jack sat down with his journal, reflecting on the conversation with Sam and everything that had happened that day. He opened to a new page and began to write. "Dear Journal. Today, I had a conversation I didn't expect to have. Sam called me. After all this time, after everything we've been through, she called. She said she was proud of me. I didn't know what to say at first, but I think it's a sign that maybe, just maybe, things can start to heal. I don't know where this will lead, but for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of the future." The phone call with Sam lingered in Jack's mind for days, replaying in his head like a song stuck on repeat. He hadn't expected her to reach out, let alone speak to him the way she had. For so long, he had carried the belief that his mistakes, his brokenness, were things she could never forgive. But her words, soft yet steady, had cracked open a door that Jack had kept locked for far too long. She was proud of him. Proud of the progress he was making. It was a simple statement, but it felt like an impossible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel like he was walking through life alone. And the idea that Sam still cared, that she wasn't just a chapter in his past, stirred something deep inside him. But it wasn't just Sam who had reached out. The message wasn't just about a potential reconciliation, it was about healing, about Jack finally being able to forgive himself. And if he couldn't do that, then how could he ever expect anyone else to? It was Friday afternoon when Jack walked through the doors of the Veterans Recovery Center, his head heavy with the thoughts he had been wrestling with all week. He had been considering a lot of things: the phone call with Sam, the conversations with Lena and the other veterans in the group, and the slow but steady changes in his own mindset. Today, though, he was feeling the weight of it all more than usual. He had come so far, he had learned to open up, to ask for help, but there was still a part of him that held back. A part of him that couldn't let go of the guilt and the fear of being hurt again. He wasn't sure how to move forward. As he entered the group therapy room, his eyes found Lena sitting at the same spot by the window. She waved him over with a knowing look in her eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked as he sat down beside her. Jack shrugged, his gaze falling to his hands. "I don't know. I feel like I'm finally starting to get it, you know. Like, I'm making progress. But then, I keep running into the same wall. I can't forgive myself for the things I did. For the things I didn't do." Lena didn't say anything at first, just letting the silence stretch out between them. Jack knew she wasn't going to offer any quick fixes. That wasn't her style. Instead, she waited until he was ready to speak. "Sam called me the other day," Jack said quietly. "She told me she was proud of me. And it felt good, but also terrifying. Like, I don't know if I deserve it." Lena turned to face him more fully, her expression thoughtful. "Why don't you think you deserve it?" "I don't know," Jack muttered. "I guess because I've done so many things that I regret. Things I can never undo. I pushed people away, I shut myself off. And now that I'm trying to fix things, I just feel like I'm pretending. Like I'm not the person I used to be." Lena's eyes softened, her voice steady. "Jack, the person you were before all of this doesn't exist anymore. You're not trying to go back to someone you used to be, you're becoming someone new. And that person, the one you're growing into, is worthy of all the things Sam said. The love, the pride, the forgiveness. But you can't expect it from anyone else if you're not willing to give it to yourself." Jack looked up, meeting Lena's gaze. "But how do I do that? How do I forgive myself when it feels like I'll never be able to make up for what I've done?" Lena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sat back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. "You know, when I first came back from deployment, I couldn't even look myself in the mirror. I felt like I had lost a part of myself that I would never get back. I made mistakes, hurt people, and I thought I didn't deserve any kind of peace. But then, one day, someone told me something I'll never forget." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper, as though the next words were meant for Jack alone. "They told me that forgiveness isn't about excusing the things we've done. It's about releasing ourselves from the chains of shame and guilt. And until we let go of that weight, we're going to keep dragging it with us, no matter how hard we try to move forward." Jack let the words settle over him, feeling them resonate deep in his chest. It wasn't easy to let go of the guilt, of course. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop carrying it around like an anchor. Later that day, Jack stood on the porch of his small apartment, staring out at the sunset. The colors of the sky, fading oranges and pinks, reminded him of the warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in so long. He had spent so many years locked away, convinced that his past would always define him, but now, he was starting to see things differently. He pulled his phone from his pocket, fingers trembling as he scrolled through his contacts. His heart pounded in his chest, the nerves rising to the surface. Sam. He hadn't called her yet. He had thought about it, about all the things he could say, but the words felt inadequate, almost empty. How do you begin to make up for years of silence? But in the end, he didn't need to have all the answers. Not yet. Jack hit the dial button, holding his breath as the phone rang. It felt like an eternity before she answered. "Hello." "Hey, Sam," Jack said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "It's Jack. I just wanted to say that I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About being proud of me. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I want to try. Try to fix what I broke. I'm sorry it took me so long. There was a pause on the other end, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what Sam was thinking, but when she spoke again, her voice was gentle. I'm glad to hear from you, Jack. I never stopped caring. Maybe we can start again. Not all at once, but maybe we can take it one step at a time. And just like that, Jack felt the weight he had carried for so long begin to lift, bit by bit. It wasn't a magic fix, and he knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time in years, he felt like there was hope. Later that night, Jack wrote in his journal again. Dear Journal. Today, I finally made the call. I reached out to Sam, and for the first time in so long, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I don't know what comes next, but I know that forgiving myself is a part of this journey. I can't change the past, but I can build a future. Maybe that's all we can really ask for. It's a step, but it feels like I'm walking in the right direction. The sun was barely beginning to rise when Jack stepped out of his apartment and onto the small patch of grass that had become his retreat. He breathed in deeply, savoring the cool morning air. Each new day felt like a gift he didn't deserve but was determined to make the most of. There were still days when the weight of his past felt unbearable, days when the anger and regret threatened to pull him back under. But the call with Sam, the conversations with Lena and the veterans, and the quiet moments of self-reflection had led him to one undeniable truth: he was capable of change. He wasn't who he had been in the past, and that realization had become his strength. The sun was rising higher now, casting a warm glow across the landscape. The world felt full of possibility, something Jack hadn't truly felt in years. Jack's routine had shifted since that pivotal conversation with Sam. His mornings now began with a brisk walk around the neighborhood, followed by a few hours at the recovery center, where he worked through more personal therapy and group sessions. And then, at the end of the day, he found himself sitting with his journal, letting the words spill out of him as if they were the only way to make sense of it all. It wasn't easy, though. No part of healing ever was. On this particular afternoon, Jack was sitting in the same group therapy room, his pen still in hand, when Miriam walked in. She was a woman of few words, but when she spoke, people listened. There was something about her presence, an air of understanding and authority, that made even the most broken feel like they could be fixed. Jack, she said with a nod, before turning to the group. Today, I'd like to try something different. I want us to talk about second chances, about what they mean to us. There was a murmur of curiosity among the veterans, but Jack's focus was entirely on Miriam. A second chance. He had already been given one, by Sam, by Lena, and by himself. But he hadn't yet fully embraced the magnitude of it. I know a lot of you have faced challenges, made mistakes, Miriam continued. But I also know that every day, we are given the opportunity to change, to try again. The question is, are we willing to take it? The room fell into silence. Jack wasn't sure what to say. He had never been one to jump at opportunities. He had always waited for the world to show him a reason to change, but this time, it felt like the world was waiting for him. Later that day, as Jack was leaving the recovery center, he ran into Lena. She was sitting on a bench just outside, her eyes scanning the street as if looking for something or someone. Jack approached her, feeling an unexpected sense of calm. Hey, he greeted her. Lena turned to face him, offering a rare, knowing smile. Hey, Jack. You look like you've been thinking. I have, Jack admitted, sitting down next to her. About second chances. About what it means to really take one. Lena's smile faded, but her eyes softened. You've already taken one. Don't you see that? I don't know, Jack said, his voice hesitant. I guess I've been waiting for the world to hand me one. But maybe that's not how it works. Maybe it's up to me to create it. Lena nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and hope. Exactly. It's never about waiting for permission. It's about deciding that you're worth it, worth the chance to change, to grow, to move forward. And sometimes, that means confronting the parts of yourself you'd rather forget. Jack looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. So, what now? Lena shrugged, her face softening. Now you live. You make choices. You let people in. You keep moving forward, no matter how hard it is. As the days passed, Jack found himself taking those steps, no matter how small. He continued to write in his journal, but now the entries were different. They were filled with reflections, but also with hope. There was a shift in his mindset, a quiet acknowledgement that he was no longer the man he had been. He was Jack, someone who had survived, someone who was worthy of a second chance. It wasn't always easy. He still had days when the weight of his past threatened to pull him back. But he had people now, friends, mentors, and even Sam, who had reminded him that healing was never a solitary journey. One evening, as Jack sat at his small kitchen table, he received a text. It was from Sam. She had texted him a few times since their conversation, but this one felt different. Jack, I'm coming to town this weekend. I'd love to see you, just talk, maybe take a walk. No pressure, just reconnect. The message left Jack feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. For so long, he had avoided confronting the past, afraid of the emotions it would stir up. But now, he was beginning to understand that facing it was the only way to move forward. He wasn't just asking for a second chance with Sam, he was giving himself a second chance to rebuild everything. When Saturday arrived, Jack was nervous but determined. He stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his shirt, running his hands over his short, stubbled beard, and taking one final breath before he stepped out the door. As he made his way to the cafe where they'd agreed to meet, his heart thumped in his chest. Was this really happening? Was he really about to sit down with the woman he'd once loved, who still seemed to care about him? He arrived early, the sounds of the city bustling around him, but his mind was elsewhere. He barely noticed the traffic, the honking of horns, the chatter of passers-by. All that mattered was the table in the corner, where Sam would walk in any minute. When Sam finally arrived, Jack's breath caught in his throat. She looked the same, but there was a softness in her expression that made her seem more at peace than the woman he remembered. The years hadn't been kind to her either, but somehow, she carried herself with a sense of calm he hadn't expected. "Hey," Sam said, her voice tentative, as she slid into the seat across from him. "Hey," Jack replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You look good." She smiled, but it was a smile tinged with both hope and hesitation. "So do you. It's good to see you." They sat in silence for a moment, unsure of where to begin. But neither of them needed to say anything right away. For the first time in years, the quiet felt comfortable. As they spoke over coffee, Jack realized something that he hadn't been ready to admit before: they didn't need to figure everything out in one conversation. They didn't need to force anything. What mattered was that they were both there, in that moment, giving themselves the space to breathe, to heal. The rest of the afternoon was spent talking about everything and nothing. And when they said goodbye, there were no grand gestures, no promises made. Just the quiet understanding that they both had a long road ahead of them. But for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel alone. That evening, as he sat on his porch and watched the sunset, Jack wrote once more in his journal. "Dear Journal. Today, I took another step. I spent time with Sam, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. Maybe that's what a second chance is all about, not pretending to be perfect, but accepting who you are now, and being willing to change. I'm not sure what comes next, but I do know this: I'm finally ready to live. To stop hiding from the past and step into the future." The day after his meeting with Sam, Jack woke up early, but instead of the usual anxiety and dread that had accompanied him every morning for years, there was a new feeling stirring within him. It was a sense of purpose, an odd but comforting shift. The past hadn't been erased, nor would it ever be, but it no longer had the same hold over him. It wasn't going to be easy, but he finally felt ready to walk the road of redemption. Jack knew, though, that the road wasn't going to be a straight line. There would be bumps and detours, more difficult moments ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he was determined to face them head-on. At the recovery center, Jack's routine remained mostly the same: therapy, group sessions, daily reflections, but something had changed. He felt more engaged, more present. There was a subtle shift in how he approached the conversations with others. He had begun to open up in ways that he hadn't before, offering support, sharing parts of himself that had once been hidden behind walls of shame. Lena noticed it immediately. "You've been different lately," she said, one afternoon, after a group session where Jack had shared a particularly vulnerable moment about his time in the military. "I think you're finally starting to believe you deserve this. Deserve this healing." Jack looked at her, unsure how to respond. He hadn't really considered it in those terms, but she was right. There was a part of him, deep down, that was beginning to believe he was worthy of a second chance. Not just from Sam, not just from the people around him, but from himself. "Maybe," Jack said, his voice tentative. "I've been running from my past for so long, I don't even know how to start living without it hanging over me. But I think I'm ready to move forward." Lena smiled, nodding as if she had expected nothing less. "It's not about being perfect. It's about taking each day as it comes, doing the work, and not giving up when it gets hard. You're doing it, Jack." That evening, after the group session, Jack sat at his usual table at the center and began writing in his journal. He had been keeping it up, but tonight, there was something different about the way the words flowed. He no longer felt like he was just documenting his pain, his mistakes. This time, he was writing about progress, about hope. "Dear Journal. Today was different. It wasn't monumental, but it felt like a shift. I've always been afraid of what lies ahead, afraid of the work, the pain. But today, I'm starting to understand something. Redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about taking ownership of it. Not letting it define me, but letting it teach me. I can't undo the things I've done, but I can use them to shape the person I'm becoming. It's not easy, but I'm willing to fight for this. I'm willing to fight for me." Asterisk. As the days passed, Jack found himself increasingly immersed in the healing process. He was working through the trauma of his past, acknowledging the mistakes and missteps, but also recognizing the growth. Each day was a small victory, whether it was a meaningful conversation with a fellow veteran, a breakthrough in therapy, or a simple act of kindness he offered to someone else. The road to redemption wasn't fast, and Jack knew there would be setbacks, but the difference now was that he was walking with purpose. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a direction, a future. 2 weeks later, Jack received a call that would be another step in his journey, a call from an old acquaintance. "Jack. It's Andrew," the voice on the other end said. "I'm not sure if you remember me, but I was at the same unit as you back in the day. I heard about what you've been going through, and I wanted to reach out." Jack paused, surprised. Andrew had been a fellow soldier back during their deployment, someone Jack hadn't spoken to since his discharge. Their relationship had been professional, nothing more, but Jack hadn't expected anyone from his past to reach out. "Andrew? Wow, it's been a long time. What's going on?" Jack asked, his voice guarded but curious. "I heard you've been working through some things," Andrew said, his tone sincere. "I know what it's like to get stuck in that place. But I want you to know that there's always a way out. It might not seem like it now, but you don't have to go through it alone. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Jack felt a strange warmth spread through him. It was an unexpected gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Someone from his past, someone who knew the darkness he had walked through, was offering a hand, asking for nothing in return. "Thanks, Andrew," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. I appreciate that. It means a lot more than you know." Later that evening, Jack sat on his porch again, the cool air around him settling as the city buzzed in the distance. He thought about Andrew's call, about the unexpected support he had just received. It was moments like this that Jack realized the importance of community. Not just the people he had around him now, but the connections he had made along the way. And maybe, just maybe, redemption wasn't a solitary pursuit. Maybe it was about reaching out, about allowing others to reach back, and about finding the strength to do it together. The following weekend, Jack decided to take another step toward reconciling his past. Sam had texted him again, this time suggesting they meet in person to discuss their future. Jack had been nervous at first, unsure of how to approach their next conversation. But he had realized that avoiding the conversation wasn't going to help him move forward. When he arrived at the cafe where they had met before, Jack found Sam already sitting at the same table. She smiled as he walked in, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal, comfortable. "I'm glad you came," Sam said, her voice warm. Jack smiled back, sitting down across from her. "I'm glad you asked. I think I'm finally ready to talk about what comes next." Sam nodded, her gaze soft. "I know things have been difficult for you, Jack. But I also know that you're stronger than you think. You've made progress, and I'm proud of you. I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here." Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. He hadn't expected to hear that. He had been expecting more uncertainty, more hesitation. But this, her kindness, her acceptance, felt like a lifeline. "I'm ready," Jack said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I'm ready to try again. With you, with myself. I know I have a lot to prove, but I want to give this a chance. I want to build something new." Sam's eyes shone with a mixture of relief and hope. "Then let's start. Together." That night, as Jack once again sat with his journal, he wrote. "Dear Journal. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time, I'm not afraid to face it. I'm not afraid of what I've done or where I've been. What matters now is where I'm going. I'm walking this road of redemption, not alone, but with others who care. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough." Asterisk. Jack stood on the edge of the small park, watching the children play. Their laughter was a distant sound, filled with innocence and joy, something Jack hadn't felt in a long time. He had always been focused on surviving, on getting through one day at a time. But now, as he observed the world around him, he began to understand something deeper. Life wasn't just about survival, it was about living. He took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. The road to redemption was not linear, and there were still days when the weight of his past tried to pull him under. But Jack had learned to take each day as it came. Every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. The mistakes of his past didn't define him anymore. They had become lessons, and each lesson was another brick in the foundation of the man he was trying to become. It was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to dip low on the horizon. Jack made his way home, his steps a little lighter than they had been in weeks. At home, Jack found a voicemail from Andrew, the old soldier who had reached out to him recently. It had been a few days since their conversation, but Jack hadn't expected to hear from him again. The message was brief, but it left Jack with something to think about. "Hey, Jack. It's Andrew. I wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I know the road's been tough, but I just wanted to remind you that I'm here, man. I'm proud of you. Keep pushing forward. You've got this." Jack sat down on the couch, the message playing over and over in his mind. He had never been good at accepting praise. Growing up, he had always believed that he had to earn everything, that nothing was given freely. But hearing Andrew's words, hearing the simple encouragement, stirred something in Jack. For the first time, he began to believe it, he had made progress. He was moving forward, even when it didn't feel like it. The following day, Jack woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He had been attending his therapy sessions and group meetings consistently, but something inside him told him that it was time to take another step, one that might seem small to others but was monumental for him. He picked up his phone and dialed Lena's number. When she answered, Jack could hear the familiar warmth in her voice. "Hey, Jack. How's it going?" "I've been thinking," Jack said, his voice steady but with a trace of uncertainty. "About the future. About what comes next." Lena was quiet for a moment, then replied, "I'm glad to hear that. What's on your mind?" "I think I'm ready to go back to work," Jack said, surprising even himself with the admission. "I want to start building something again. I don't know if I'm ready for a full-time job yet, but maybe just something to get me back on track." Lena smiled on the other end of the line. "I think that's a great idea. It's not about rushing into things, but about taking control of your life again. Even if it's just a small step, it's a step forward." Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders. "Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Lena. I needed to hear that." "You've got this," Lena replied. "Just remember to be patient with yourself. Healing takes time." Jack spent the rest of the day updating his resume and researching job openings. He was realistic, he didn't expect to land a high-paying job right away, but that wasn't the point. What mattered was that he was taking action. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. That evening, as he sat down to dinner, he thought about how far he had come. When he had first arrived at the recovery center, the idea of returning to any kind of normal life had seemed impossible. But now, he was on the brink of something new. He wasn't sure what that something was, but he was finally ready to find out. A few days later, Jack found himself walking through the doors of a local construction company. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The job wasn't glamorous, it was manual labor, mostly, but it was honest work. And for Jack, that was enough. As he walked into the office to fill out the application, he felt a sense of anxiety creep up on him. What if they rejected him? What if they saw his past and judged him? But then he remembered the words of Andrew, Lena, and Sam. He wasn't defined by his past. It didn't matter if they knew who he had been. What mattered was who he was now, and the man he was trying to become. He handed the application to the receptionist and waited as she processed it. A few minutes later, the manager, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, came over to speak with him. "You Jack?" the man asked, his eyes scanning the application before locking onto Jack's face. Jack nodded. "Yes, sir. I'm here to apply for the labor position." The manager eyed him for a moment, then said, "You've got some experience, huh?" Jack paused. It was true that he had worked various jobs in construction throughout his life, but the past few years had left him with little more than memories. Still, he gave an honest answer. "I've worked construction before. I've been out of the workforce for a while, but I'm ready to get back into it." The manager raised an eyebrow but didn't comment further. Instead, he nodded toward the door. "Come on back. Let's see if you're a good fit." Jack spent the next few hours working side by side with a small crew. It was hard work, but it felt good. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he was doing something worthwhile. The sweat on his brow, the ache in his muscles, it all felt real, like he was rebuilding not just his body, but his life. When the shift ended, Jack was exhausted but satisfied. The manager had given him a tentative offer to start the following week. It wasn't a full-time position yet, but it was a start. And that, Jack realized, was all he needed. That night, Jack sat down to write in his journal, his fingers moving across the page with an ease he hadn't experienced in years. Dear Journal. Today, I did something new. I went to work. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I've spent so long running from my past that I didn't think I could ever move forward. But today, I took a step. A small one, but a step nonetheless. I'm not sure where this road will take me, but I know one thing for sure, I'm not giving up. Not anymore. Asterisk. Jack stood at the edge of the park again, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his jacket, the cool evening air biting at his face. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, but he remained there, gazing out at the distant skyline. Life in the city had always been chaotic, but now it felt different, he felt different. He wasn't sure what exactly had changed. He could still feel the shadows of his past lingering around him, whispering at the edges of his mind, but they no longer controlled him. The path to redemption wasn't easy, but he was walking it. With each day, the weight of his past seemed just a little bit lighter, but there was one thing he hadn't been able to shake off completely: forgiveness. Jack hadn't spoken to his family since his discharge from the military. He had avoided them for years, unable to face the disappointment in their eyes. They hadn't understood what he had been through, what he had experienced. He had built a wall around himself, pushing everyone away, convinced that he was better off alone. But recently, he had started to wonder, what if he was wrong? What if, in seeking redemption, he needed to allow himself to be forgiven? And if he could accept forgiveness from others, could he finally forgive himself? The thought lingered in his mind as he walked back to his small apartment. The recovery center, the job, and the therapy were all steps in the right direction, but there was something bigger at play here. The hardest part of his journey was confronting the things he had done, the mistakes he had made, and the relationships he had damaged. And that meant facing the people he had hurt the most. That evening, after a long shift at the construction site, Jack found himself sitting at the kitchen table, his fingers tracing the edges of his phone. It had been a while since he had thought about calling his mother, but tonight, the thought wouldn't leave him. The silence between them had stretched on for years, but deep down, Jack knew that if he ever wanted to truly heal, he had to confront it. He took a deep breath and dialed the number. His heart pounded in his chest as the phone rang, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, after what felt like an age, a voice answered on the other end. Hello. It was his mother's voice, and for a moment, Jack was paralyzed. He hadn't heard it in years, and it was as though the years of silence rushed back in a tidal wave. Mom, Jack said, his voice rough but steady. It's me. Jack. There was a long pause, and Jack could hear his mother take a sharp breath. Jack. Is everything okay? For a moment, Jack wasn't sure how to respond. What could he say after all this time? He had been absent, lost in his own pain and anger. He had turned his back on her, on everyone. But now, for the first time in years, he wanted to reach out. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry, Jack said, his words tentative. I've been carrying around a lot of guilt for a long time. I hurt you, and I didn't mean to. I wasn't ready to face it before, but I am now. I want you to know I'm sorry. There was silence on the other end of the line, and Jack's heart raced. He wasn't sure what he expected her to say, but he hadn't prepared himself for the weight of her response. I don't know if you can ever understand how much I've missed you, Jack, his mother said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. You pushed me away, but I never stopped loving you. I never stopped hoping that one day you would come back. I don't know what you've been through, but I know you've been through hell. I can forgive you. I just want you back. Jack's throat tightened as the weight of her words settled over him. It was the forgiveness he had been searching for, the acceptance he had longed for. It wasn't just about her forgiving him. It was about her willingness to take him back, to open her heart again, after everything he had put her through. I don't deserve it, Jack whispered, his voice breaking. But thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance. You don't need to deserve it, Jack, she replied gently. You're my son. I'll always love you, no matter what. Tears welled up in Jack's eyes, but he didn't try to hold them back. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel. It was like a dam had burst, and the flood of emotions that had been trapped inside him for years rushed to the surface. The hurt, the anger, the pain, it was all still there, but now it was mixed with relief, with hope. "I'll come visit you soon," Jack said, his voice steadier now. "I promise." "I'll be waiting," his mother replied, her voice full of warmth. As Jack hung up the phone, he sat there for a moment, letting the silence of the apartment settle around him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He had taken a step toward healing, toward reconciliation. And in that moment, he realized that forgiveness wasn't just about letting go, it was about moving forward. It was about accepting that mistakes were part of the journey, but they didn't have to define him. The next day, Jack went back to work. His muscles ached from the physical labor, but there was a lightness in his step. He had reached out to his mother, and that was one of the hardest things he had ever done. But it was also one of the most important. He had confronted the weight of his past, and while it hadn't been easy, he felt like he was standing taller because of it. At lunch, he sat with the crew, the sound of their laughter filling the air. For the first time, Jack didn't feel like an outsider. He wasn't just the guy who had fallen off the edge. He was part of something, a team. And in that moment, it didn't matter what had happened in the past. What mattered was what was happening now. That evening, after his shift, Jack took a walk down the familiar streets of his neighborhood. It wasn't where he had grown up, but it was a place that felt like home now. He had no intention of ever returning to the man he once was. He had made mistakes, but he had learned from them. He was ready to leave the past behind and embrace the future. As he reached the park, he sat on a bench and looked up at the stars. The weight he had been carrying, shame, regret, guilt, felt lighter now, like it had been replaced with something more powerful, hope. Jack stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. His face was still marked by the struggles of his past, weathered, tired, but resilient. He had come a long way since that first day he walked into the recovery center. Every day had been a fight, a step forward, a decision to move away from the shadows that had once defined him. But today, something felt different. It was the first day he had felt ready to truly face the world, not just as a survivor, but as someone who was finally starting to live. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't have a perfect past. But he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't afraid of being vulnerable anymore. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind for Jack. His work at the construction site had given him a sense of purpose, but he still felt something was missing. He had been so focused on getting back to normal, working, surviving, trying to repair the damage he'd done, that he hadn't really allowed himself to connect with anyone, not deeply. It wasn't that he didn't want to, it was just that old fear, the one that told him he wasn't worthy of real connection. It wasn't until Lena had asked him about his relationships during one of their therapy sessions that Jack realized how much he had shut people out. She had gently pointed out that, while he had made significant strides in rebuilding his life, he hadn't yet fully allowed himself to lean on others. "You've worked so hard to find strength in yourself, Jack," Lena had said. "But sometimes, true strength comes from allowing yourself to be vulnerable. It's not weakness. It's the willingness to let others in." Her words had stayed with him. Now, here he was, standing in front of the mirror, making a decision. He was going to call Sam, the friend from his military days who had reached out to him during his lowest points. Sam had always been there, but Jack had been hesitant to accept his help. It had felt easier to stay isolated, to avoid the discomfort of being open with someone. But Jack realized now that he didn't have to face this journey alone. Taking a deep breath, he dialed Sam's number. The phone rang a few times before Sam answered, his voice familiar and warm. "Jack. What's up, man?" "Hey, Sam," Jack said, his voice uncertain at first. "I've been meaning to reach out. I I just wanted to thank you. For checking in on me, for offering your support. I think I need to start accepting that help. There was a brief pause before Sam responded, his tone soft but encouraging. You don't need to thank me, Jack. I'm glad you're reaching out. I've been worried about you, man. I know it hasn't been easy, but you're doing great. I'm proud of you. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He had never been one to show emotion openly, especially not with someone he had served with. But hearing those words from Sam, words of validation, of understanding, made something inside him crack open. The years of isolation, of pride, of fear, suddenly, they didn't seem so heavy anymore. I don't know how to do this, Sam, Jack admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to let people in, to really trust again. Sam was silent for a moment before speaking with a sincerity that Jack felt deep in his chest. You don't have to figure it all out at once. It's okay to take small steps. The most important thing is that you're trying, Jack. That's what matters. Jack leaned against the counter, letting Sam's words sink in. Thanks, man. Really. You're welcome, Sam said. And hey, whenever you're ready, I'm here. No rush. We'll take it one step at a time. The conversation with Sam left Jack with a sense of relief, but also a new challenge, one that would require him to step even further out of his comfort zone. It wasn't just about reaching out to old friends or family anymore. It was about being vulnerable enough to let people see him for who he truly was, flaws and all. The next day, as Jack walked to the construction site, he found himself thinking about what it meant to be vulnerable. He had always thought that strength came from keeping everything locked inside, from pretending that he didn't need anyone. But the truth was, he had spent so many years building walls around himself that he had never really given others the chance to be there for him. And now, with each conversation he had, with each moment of vulnerability, he was slowly tearing those walls down. It wasn't easy, and there were days when he wanted to retreat, to go back to the safety of isolation. But he couldn't afford to do that anymore. He was changing. He was learning. At work, Jack felt a shift in his relationships with his coworkers. He had always kept to himself, but something had changed. He was starting to open up, to share more of himself with the people around him. It was small things at first, joking with the guys during lunch, offering help when someone was struggling with a task. But each time he reached out, even in the smallest way, it felt like he was building something new. He was becoming part of the team, not just a worker, but a friend, someone who was present and engaged. That afternoon, after a long shift, Jack sat down on the steps outside the construction site, feeling the exhaustion in his bones. But there was a lightness in his chest, a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. He had made it through another day, not just surviving, but living. As he pulled out his phone to send a quick text to Lena, thanking her for her support, he felt a sense of clarity wash over him. Vulnerability didn't have to be scary. It didn't have to be a weakness. In fact, it was the strongest thing he had ever done. Vulnerability is the gateway to connection, to growth, and to healing. It is the courage to face your fears and say, this is who I am, and I am worthy of love and connection. Brené Brown. That night, as Jack lay in bed, he thought about everything he had learned. The road had been long and difficult, but it was also beautiful in its own way. He wasn't perfect. He would never be perfect. But he didn't have to be. He had nothing left to hide, and nothing left to prove. Jack closed his eyes and let out a deep breath. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to step into the light. It was a crisp, clear morning when Jack stepped outside, the sun shining through the clouds like a beacon of promise. The air was fresh, not too cold but with just enough bite to remind him that life was constantly changing. He took a deep breath, feeling the coolness fill his lungs, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was ready to face whatever the day had in store. His life had begun to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. The steps he'd taken, reaching out to his mother, accepting help from Sam, and being vulnerable with the people around him, had all led to a feeling of something new blossoming inside him. Jack had found himself gaining confidence, something he thought he had lost forever. It wasn't about getting everything right or being perfect anymore, it was about progress, the small victories, the moments where he chose to be open and honest instead of retreating into the darkness of his own mind. After his conversation with Lena and Sam, Jack had made an important decision. He wanted more than just a job that gave him enough money to survive. He wanted to build a future that mattered. He had always admired the work that his old friend Sam did with the local veterans organization. Sam had used his own struggles to help others, and now, Jack was ready to do the same. That morning, Jack headed to the local veterans center, a place that had provided resources and support to countless former soldiers who were going through similar battles. It was a place of healing, and Jack knew he could learn a lot by being there. Not just for himself, but for others, too. He had called ahead the night before, asking if there were any volunteer opportunities available. The director of the center, a woman named Rachel, had told him to stop by the next morning. As Jack walked into the veterans center, he felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced in years. The building was bustling with activity, but there was a calmness in the air that made it feel different from the chaos he'd grown used to. There were veterans sitting in groups, talking, working on their recovery plans, and discussing their goals. It was a place of support, not judgment. Rachel greeted him with a warm smile when he entered. "Jack, it's great to meet you in person. I've heard a lot of good things from Sam. He said you've been making some real progress." Jack felt a flush of pride at hearing Sam speak highly of him. It wasn't something he had been used to in the past, but hearing it now made him feel stronger, more confident. "I appreciate that, Rachel," Jack said, shaking her hand. "I've been trying to turn my life around. I want to help however I can." Rachel's smile grew wider. "We could definitely use someone like you. We're always looking for volunteers who are willing to share their experiences with others. You've been through a lot, Jack. You can help others who are struggling with the same things." Jack spent the next few hours at the center, meeting other veterans who had walked similar paths, some more recent, some further down the road to recovery. He shared his own story, speaking openly about his struggles with homelessness, addiction, and the emotional scars of war. It wasn't easy. It never was. But with each word he spoke, Jack realized something. Helping others didn't just mean offering advice or guidance. It also meant being honest, letting them see the vulnerable parts of himself. And as he did that, he began to feel a sense of connection he hadn't felt in years. That evening, after his time at the center, Jack sat down at a small cafe and reflected on everything that had happened so far. He thought about how much he had changed, how much he had grown. But he also thought about the future. The possibilities ahead of him now felt endless. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about thriving, about making a difference, about building something new. As Jack sipped his coffee, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his mother. "I'm so proud of you, Jack. You've come so far. I can't wait to see you soon. Keep going, you're doing great." A smile spread across Jack's face. It was a simple message, but it meant the world to him. It wasn't just that his mother was proud of him. It was that she saw him for who he was now. Not the person he had been in the past, but the person he was becoming. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Jack worked hard at the Veterans Center, attending support groups, sharing his story, and offering guidance to those who were just starting their recovery journey. He started to feel like he belonged, not just as a volunteer but as a part of something greater than himself. He also continued working at the construction site, but now, there was a new sense of balance in his life. He wasn't just going through the motions, he was working with purpose. Every day felt like a step forward. One afternoon, Rachel pulled Jack aside at the center. "Jack, I've been meaning to talk to you," she said, her expression serious but kind. There's an opportunity coming up. We've got a mentorship program for veterans who are just starting their recovery. We need someone who has experience, someone who can show them that recovery is possible. I think you'd be a perfect fit." Jack felt a rush of emotion as he processed her words. It was a big ask, a huge responsibility, but it also felt like the next step in his journey. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, the chance to not just help others but to lead, to guide those who were walking the same path he had once been on. "I'd be honored, Rachel," Jack said, his voice steady. "I want to do this. I want to give back." That night, as Jack lay in bed, he thought about everything that had led him to this point. The struggle, the pain, the loneliness, it had all brought him here, to this new beginning. And for the first time in his life, Jack didn't feel afraid of what was ahead. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There would still be challenges, still moments of doubt, but Jack was ready for them. He had already proven to himself that he was strong enough to face whatever came his way. And now, he was ready to help others do the same. Jack sat in his small, cluttered apartment, staring at the blank page of his notebook. The soft hum of the city outside filtered through his window, a constant reminder that life continued to move, whether he was ready or not. But today, Jack felt ready. More than ready, actually. He had made a decision that would change the course of his life, and the excitement of it coursed through his veins like a fresh surge of adrenaline. He had accepted Rachel's offer to become a mentor for the Veterans Recovery Program. It had felt like the right thing to do, but now, as he sat there with his thoughts swirling, Jack wondered if he was truly prepared for what lay ahead. The responsibility was massive. He wasn't just guiding someone through their recovery. He was showing them that it was possible, that they could survive, and thrive, after everything they had been through. But even as doubt crept in, Jack felt something deeper within him, a purpose. It was the first time in a long time he had felt this alive, this driven. The weight of his past, the guilt and shame he had carried, was starting to lift as he found his footing in this new chapter of his life. His first day as a mentor arrived quickly. He had spent the previous night going over the material Rachel had given him, reviewing the recovery strategies, and thinking about how best to approach his first meeting with the veterans who would be under his guidance. He wanted to do this right. He wanted to make a difference, to show them that it was possible to rebuild, no matter how far they had fallen. As he walked into the Veterans Center that morning, Jack's nerves bubbled up, but so did his determination. He could do this. Rachel greeted him at the door, her eyes full of encouragement. "Ready?" she asked, her voice full of warmth. Jack nodded, a small but genuine smile on his face. "Yeah. Let's do it." The room was filled with a diverse group of veterans, all with different stories, different struggles, and different reasons for seeking recovery. Some of them were still deep in their battle, while others, like Jack, were beginning to emerge from the darkness. Rachel introduced Jack to the group. "This is Jack," she said, gesturing toward him. "He's been through his own recovery journey and has agreed to be a mentor. He's here to help, guide, and listen. You're not alone." Jack felt a lump in his throat as he looked around at the faces in the room. They were filled with uncertainty, doubt, and some, he could see, had that familiar look of despair he had once carried. But he also saw something else in their eyes, a glimmer of hope. "Hey everyone," Jack began, his voice steady but warm. "I'm Jack, and I just want to say that I'm here for you, however you need me. I've been where you are, lost, struggling, wondering if things would ever get better. And I'm here to tell you that they can. I'm living proof of that. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it." Jack could feel the weight of his words settle in the room, and he watched as the veterans nodded, some of them visibly moved. He had no illusion that his story alone would fix everything, but he hoped it would show them that there was a way out, a path forward. After a brief silence, one of the veterans, a man named Alex, spoke up. His voice was rough, and his eyes were shadowed with the weight of his own pain. "How did you do it?" Alex asked. "How did you get out of the hell you were in?" I mean, I want to get better, but I don't know where to start. Jack took a deep breath, remembering his own journey. I started by being honest with myself. I had to admit that I needed help. That was the hardest part for me, asking for help, allowing myself to be vulnerable. But once I did that, things started to change. It wasn't an overnight thing, but each day, I took one small step forward. And eventually, those steps added up. The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed Jack's words. He knew that they were looking for something more than just advice, they were looking for hope, for a reason to believe that things could get better. And Jack was determined to be that reason. Over the next few weeks, Jack continued to meet with his group of veterans. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when the men would open up about their struggles with addiction, loss, and the scars left by war. It was painful, hearing their stories, because they were so much like his own. But Jack stayed strong for them, even when he felt himself teetering on the edge of his own emotions. As time went on, he noticed something remarkable. The veterans in his group were starting to trust him, to open up more, to take those small steps forward just as he had. They weren't all there yet, but they were trying. And for Jack, that was everything. He began to see the impact he was having on their lives. One veteran, Steve, came to him after a session, his face bright with gratitude. "Jack, I just wanted to say thanks. I've been sober for a month now. I never thought I could do it, but hearing you talk about your journey, it's made me believe that I can change too." Jack's heart swelled with pride as he clapped Steve on the back. "That's amazing, Steve. You're doing the work. I'm just here to remind you that you can do it." As Jack continued to pour himself into his role as a mentor, he found that his own healing process was accelerating. The act of helping others, of being there for them in their darkest moments, was strengthening his own resolve to never go back to the person he had been. It wasn't just the veterans who were benefiting from his mentorship. Jack was learning as well. He was learning to be patient, to be understanding, and to appreciate the small victories. He was learning that the work of recovery was never truly done, it was a continuous process of growth, both for himself and for the people he helped. And with each passing day, Jack realized something important: his purpose wasn't just about finding a job or staying sober. His purpose was to help others find their own path to healing, to show them that there was life after the war, after the pain. And with that purpose came a sense of fulfillment he had never imagined. That night, as Jack sat down to write in his journal, he reflected on everything that had led him here. The journey had been long, filled with obstacles, but it had also been beautiful. "I'm not the same person I was before," Jack wrote. "And I don't think I ever will be. But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's the person I'm becoming that matters." Jack stood at the edge of the construction site, looking out over the half-built structure that would soon become a new office building. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the dirt, highlighting the workers moving around, busy with the tasks at hand. His hands were still calloused from the labor, but they had become steady, no longer trembling from the weight of uncertainty. It had been a few months since he had taken on his role as a mentor, and he had learned more about himself than he ever thought possible. The veterans group was doing well. Steve, the man who had thanked him for his support, had reached his 6-month milestone of sobriety. Others, like Alex, had started opening up more about their past traumas. Jack could see that they were slowly beginning to rebuild their lives, just as he was rebuilding his. But even though he had come a long way, Jack knew that his journey wasn't over. Every day, there were new challenges to face, new lessons to learn, and new pieces of his past to come to terms with. That morning, Jack had received a phone call from Rachel. She had asked him to meet her at the Veterans Center to discuss an upcoming event. Jack had agreed, though a knot of anticipation had settled in his stomach. Something about the conversation felt more serious than usual. As he drove across town to the center, Jack couldn't help but think about the other part of his life, the construction work that had provided him with a steady paycheck and a sense of stability. It was a good job, but it wasn't his passion. Still, he had to admit, the work kept him grounded. It kept him busy, gave him something tangible to focus on. But lately, he had been thinking about how much he enjoyed helping the veterans. Every time he saw one of them succeed, every time he saw that spark of hope in their eyes, it reminded him of why he had chosen this path in the first place. Maybe it was time for a change. Maybe it was time to take that next step. Rachel was waiting for him in her office when Jack arrived. She had a warm smile on her face, but her eyes held an air of seriousness. "Jack, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to talk to you about something important," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "We've been discussing expanding the mentor program, and I'd like you to be more involved in that process. You've made such an impact already, and I think you're the right person to help guide this next phase. We're looking at offering more resources to veterans, job training, life skills, therapy, and we need someone to help oversee it all." Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The opportunity he had been hoping for. The chance to turn his passion into something more than just a side project. But as the excitement built, so did the uncertainty. This was a big responsibility. It would require a level of commitment he hadn't yet fully embraced. He would have to let go of his comfort zone. And most terrifying of all, he would have to confront the parts of himself that he wasn't always proud of. Rachel seemed to sense his hesitation and leaned forward. "I know this is a big step, Jack. But you've shown us what you're capable of. You've done the hard work. And I believe you're ready for this." Jack was silent for a moment, considering the weight of her words. He had come so far, but now the road ahead was foggy and uncertain. Could he really take on this new responsibility? Could he truly embrace his purpose and take the next leap? The answer came to him quickly, as he thought about the veterans he had mentored, the ones who had found their strength again, who were now on the path to healing. He had helped them see that they were more than their past, that they were capable of so much more than they realized. And now, he had to believe that for himself, too. "I'm in," Jack said, his voice steady. "I'll take on the role. I'll help however I can." Rachel's smile widened, and for the first time in a long time, Jack felt a deep sense of certainty. This was his future. This was where he was meant to be. As the weeks passed, Jack threw himself into the new role with a dedication he had never thought possible. He worked alongside Rachel to implement the new programs, offering advice, organizing workshops, and making sure the veterans had the resources they needed to succeed. There were obstacles along the way, funding issues, bureaucratic delays, and moments when it felt like nothing was moving forward, but Jack remained committed. His life was starting to take shape in a way that felt more real than ever before. The work at the Veterans Center became a calling. He was no longer just a mentor, he was part of a larger mission. And it was this mission that drove him every day. One evening, as Jack walked home from the center, he received a call from his mother. It was the first time they had spoken in weeks, and he could hear the warmth in her voice when she greeted him. "Jack, I just wanted to check in and see how everything's going," she said, her words full of care. "How's the mentoring going? And how are you feeling?" Jack smiled, leaning against the railing of his apartment building. "It's going great, Mom. I've been busy, but I'm really happy with where things are. I feel like I'm making a difference. It's everything I've wanted." "That's wonderful to hear," she said. "I'm so proud of you, Jack. You've come so far." For the first time in a long while, Jack didn't feel like an imposter. He didn't feel like he was pretending to be someone he wasn't. He had done the hard work, and now, he was standing in the life he had built. That night, as Jack lay in bed, he thought about everything that had led him here, the darkness, the pain, the trial that had changed his life. He thought about the man he had been when he first walked into that courtroom, and he couldn't help but marvel at how far he had come. He wasn't the same person anymore. And that was okay. Because, in the end, he wasn't supposed to be. He was supposed to grow, to learn, to change. And that's exactly what he had done. Now, he had a future that wasn't defined by his past. It was a future he had built, step by step, through dedication, vulnerability, and the willingness to face his own demons. And with each passing day, Jack was beginning to see that the future wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. Jack sat quietly on the worn-out bench in the small park near the Veterans Center, his eyes following the movement of the people passing by. The city was alive, as it always had been, but for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he was part of the flow. Not just a passive observer, but an active participant. He had built something new, something worth fighting for. Today was significant. It was the day of the grand opening for the Veterans Community Center, a space that Jack had helped create. This was more than just a building, it was a symbol of the possibilities that lay ahead for the men and women who had given so much, only to be forgotten by society. Jack had spent countless hours helping to shape this vision, making sure it would provide the resources, support, and sense of community that so many veterans needed. The ceremony would begin soon, but for now, Jack was content to sit and reflect. It had been a long journey, one that had taken him through his darkest moments, but also one that had shown him the true depth of his strength. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. He glanced at it and smiled when he saw Rachel's name on the screen. "Hey, Rachel," Jack answered. "What's up?" "We're almost ready," Rachel said, her voice filled with excitement. "I just wanted to check in and make sure you're good. Are you ready for this?" Jack chuckled softly, looking around at the park. "I think I'm ready. More ready than I've ever been, actually." "That's what I like to hear," Rachel said. "You've done so much, Jack. I can't even begin to tell you how much this means to all of us. The veterans are going to love it. You've really changed the game for them." Jack's smile widened. "It's not just me. It's all of us. We've built something incredible together. And that's what matters." There was a pause on the line, and Jack could almost hear the smile in Rachel's voice. "You've come a long way, Jack. And I think this is just the beginning. You've found your purpose." As Jack walked into the center later that afternoon, the energy in the room was electric. Veterans, families, and volunteers were gathered, chatting excitedly as they waited for the ceremony to begin. The walls were adorned with banners and posters, showcasing the various programs available to the veterans. Jack's heart swelled with pride as he took it all in. Rachel was already there, greeting people and overseeing the final touches. She gave Jack a quick hug when she saw him. "Everything looks amazing," Jack said, taking in the vibrant atmosphere. "We've come a long way," Rachel replied. "And we couldn't have done it without you." Jack's chest tightened as he looked around the room. He saw familiar faces, veterans he had mentored, veterans who had now become part of this growing community. Steve was talking to a newcomer, his eyes bright with excitement as he shared his story. Alex was standing with his arm around a friend, laughing in a way that Jack hadn't seen him do in months. The transformation was tangible. The ceremony began with a speech from a local official, who praised the new community center for its impact on the veterans' lives. But Jack wasn't listening to the words, he was watching the people around him, the veterans, the ones he had helped, the ones who had helped him. They were all part of something greater than themselves now, and it was a beautiful thing to witness. Then, Rachel turned to Jack, her eyes sparkling. "It's time," she said. Jack took a deep breath and made his way to the front of the room. As he stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. All eyes were on him, and for a moment, Jack felt a wave of vulnerability wash over him. But then he looked out at the crowd, at the faces of the veterans, and everything else faded away. "Thank you, everyone, for being here today," Jack began, his voice steady. "It's hard to put into words how much this moment means to me. A year ago, I didn't know if I was going to make it. I didn't know if I'd ever find my way out of the darkness. But today, I stand here, not just as a mentor or as a man who's survived, but as someone who's thriving. And I know that each one of you has the same potential. He paused, looking out at the crowd, his words carrying the weight of everything he had learned. This center isn't just a building, Jack continued. It's a testament to what happens when we come together, when we support one another. It's a place where we can heal, grow, and rebuild. But more than that, it's a place where we can reclaim our purpose. The room erupted in applause, and Jack felt his heart swell. This was what he had worked for, this was the payoff. Not the praise, not the accolades, but the realization that he had helped create something that would change lives, just as it had changed his. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Jack spent the next few hours mingling with veterans, their families, and the volunteers who had made everything possible. Each conversation was a reminder of how far he had come, and how much further he could go. As the evening drew to a close, Jack found himself standing outside the center, the sun setting behind the city skyline. He leaned against the brick wall, taking in the cool air as the last of the guests filtered out. He wasn't sure what the future held. He didn't have all the answers, and he knew that there would still be challenges ahead. But for the first time in his life, Jack felt certain of one thing: he was exactly where he was meant to be. His phone buzzed again, and this time it was a text from his mom. "I'm so proud of you. You've come so far, Jack. I knew you could do it." A smile crossed Jack's face as he typed back a quick reply. "Thanks, Mom. I'm just getting started." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Jack looked up, finally at peace with his past and hopeful for the future. He had been through hell and back, but now, he had found his purpose. And that, he realized, was worth everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?